I've always known that blood tells stories. As a hematologist, I've spent my career listening to those stories, tales of disease, of health, of life itself. But never, in all my years of study, did I imagine that blood could tell a story like this. My name is Dr. Adrian Helsing. Yes, that Helsing. The name that's been both a blessing and a curse throughout my life. A blessing because it opened doors in my field, a curse because of the whispers that always followed. Vampire hunter, they'd say, snickering behind my back. If only they knew how close to the truth they were. It all started on a gloomy London evening, the kind where the fog seems to seep into your very bones. I was working late in my lab at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, poring over test results that refused to make sense. The door creaked open, and I looked up to see my colleague, Dr. Seward, holding a small, ornate box. "This came for you, Adrian," he said, his brow furrowed. "Special delivery from Romania. Thought you'd want it right away." I took the box, feeling its weight in my hands. It was old, carved wood with intricate designs that seemed to writhe in the dim light. A chill ran down my spine as I read the return address. Castle Dracula, Transylvania. "Thanks, James," I muttered, already engrossed in the mystery before me. As Seward left, I carefully opened the box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a single vial of blood. No note, no explanation. Just blood, dark and viscous, almost black in the vial's confines. With trembling hands, I prepared a slide and placed a drop under the microscope. What I saw defied everything I knew about hematology. The cells were wrong, mutated in a way I'd never seen before. They moved with a life of their own, seeming to reach out towards the edges of the slide. I jerked back from the microscope, my heart pounding. This wasn't possible. And yet, there it was, undeniable evidence of something beyond the realm of modern science. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, my phone buzzed. An email from an address I didn't recognize. Elena, Lupe at Transylvania-Health Row. The subject line read, "Urgent, strange blood anomalies." I opened it, my curiosity overriding my lingering shock. "Dr. Helsing, I hope this email finds you well. My name is Dr. Elena Lupe, and I'm reaching out to you from the Central Hospital of Transylvania. We've been experiencing a series of unusual cases here, all presenting with blood anomalies that defy explanation. Given your expertise and family history, I believed you might be able to assist us. Patients are presenting with severe anemia, sensitivity to light, and in some cases, an inexplicable aversion to garlic. More disturbingly, we've had reports of increased strength and aggression in some individuals. I've sent you a sample for analysis. Please, if you can, come to Transylvania. We need your help. Sincerely, Dr. Elena Lupe." I read the email twice, then a third time, my mind reeling. The sample, the symptoms, the location, it all pointed to something I'd hoped was nothing more than family legend. Something I'd convinced myself couldn't possibly be real. But the evidence was mounting, and I couldn't ignore it. I had to go to Transylvania. I had to see for myself. The next few hours passed in a blur. I called in every favor I had, arranged for emergency leave from the hospital, and booked the first flight to Romania. As I packed, my eyes fell on an old trunk in the corner of my bedroom, one I hadn't opened in years. With a deep breath, I unlocked it. Inside lay the legacy of the Helsing family, journals, weapons, and tools that had been passed down through generations. I'd always seen them as relics of a superstitious past. Now, I wasn't so sure. I selected a few items: a journal belonging to my great-great-grandfather, a silver cross, and a wooden stake that felt uncomfortably right in my hand. As I packed them alongside my modern medical equipment, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, a respected doctor in one of London's finest hospitals, preparing to hunt vampires. The flight to Romania was long and tense. I spent most of it poring over the old journal, trying to separate fact from fiction. The writing was a mix of clinical observations and wild speculation, detailed accounts of vampiric physiology interspersed with folklore and superstition. It painted a picture of a creature both terrifying and fascinating, a perfect predator, neither alive nor dead, with powers that defied natural law. But what struck me most was the description of the vampire's influence. It wasn't just the physical threat that made them dangerous, but their ability to corrupt, to seduce, to turn people against their own kind. The journal spoke of entire villages falling under the sway of a single vampire. of good people driven to commit unspeakable acts. As the plane began its descent into Transylvania, I looked out the window at the mist-shrouded Carpathian Mountains. Somewhere out there, something ancient and evil was stirring, and I, Adrian Helsing, was flying right into its den. The airport was small and dated, a relic of the communist era. As I made my way through customs, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Eyes seemed to follow me from every shadow, and the air itself felt heavy with anticipation. Dr. Elena Lupe was waiting for me in the arrivals area. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp green eyes that spoke of intelligence and determination. Her smile was warm, but I could see the worry lines etched around her eyes. "Dr. Helsing," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly. I hope your journey wasn't too uncomfortable." I shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip. "It was fine, thank you, and please call me Adrian. I appreciate you reaching out to me, Dr. Lupe. Your email was intriguing, to say the least." Her smile faded slightly. "Elena, please. And yes, intriguing is one way to put it. I have to admit, I was surprised you came. Most doctors I've contacted have dismissed my concerns as superstition or mass hysteria." We began walking towards the exit, our footsteps echoing in the near-empty terminal. "Let's just say I have an open mind," I replied carefully, "and a vested interest in unusual blood disorders. Can you tell me more about these cases?" Elena's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Not here. The walls have ears, especially when it comes to matters like this. I'll brief you on the way to the hospital." As we stepped outside, the chill mountain air hit me like a physical force. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood red and deep purple. In the distance, I could make out the silhouette of an ancient castle perched atop a crag. "Is that?" I began, unable to finish the question. Elena followed my gaze and nodded grimly. "Castle Dracula, or what's left of it. It's been abandoned for centuries, or so they say. But lately, there have been lights seen in the windows and strange noises carried on the wind." We got into her car, an old but well-maintained Dacia. As we drove through the winding mountain roads, Elena filled me in on the details of the case. "It started about 2 months ago," she said, her eyes fixed on the treacherous road ahead. "At first, it was just a few isolated cases, people coming in with severe anemia, no obvious cause. Then we started seeing other symptoms: photosensitivity, enhanced strength, rapid healing of wounds." I nodded, my mind racing. Classic symptoms of clinical vampirism, but that's a psychological condition, not a physical one. Elena shot me a sideways glance. "That's what I thought at first. But then we started getting reports of attacks, people being bitten, drained of blood, and the victims, they didn't die, they changed. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air." "Changed how?" "They became like the others, anemic, photosensitive, aggressive, and they had cravings for blood." Elena's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "We've had to isolate them. Nothing else seems to help." I was about to ask another question when something caught my eye. A figure, standing by the side of the road. As we passed, I could have sworn I saw gleaming red eyes and elongated canines, but in the blink of an eye, it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked, my heart pounding. Elena's face was grim. "See what?" I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. Nothing. Must have been my imagination. But as we continued our journey into the gathering darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, hunted. The Transylvanian night was closing in around us, and with it, the creeping certainty that I was about to face something far beyond my understanding. The old legends were stirring, the ancient evil awakening, and I, Adrian Helsing, was all that stood between it and the world of the living. The Central Hospital of Transylvania loomed before us, a stark concrete structure that seemed out of place among the ancient buildings of the town. As we pulled into the parking lot, I noticed the unusually high security. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their faces tense and alert. "Things have gotten worse since I contacted you," Elena explained, noticing my surprise. "We've had incidents, attempted escapes, attacks on staff. The government's taken notice." We made our way through a series of security checkpoints, each more stringent than the last. The air grew colder as we descended into the hospital's sublevels, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were entering a tomb rather than a medical facility. Finally, we reached a heavily fortified door. Elena swiped her keycard and entered a complex code. As the door swung open, she turned to me, her eyes grave. "Adrian, what you're about to see, it defies explanation. I need you to keep an open mind." I nodded, steeling myself. "I'm ready." The room beyond was a state-of-the-art medical bay, but it looked more like a prison. Each bed was surrounded by reinforced glass, and I could see thick restraints on every surface. But it was the patients that truly caught my attention. They were pale, impossibly, inhumanly pale, their skin almost translucent. Their eyes, when open, gleamed with an unnatural light, and their teeth. I involuntarily took a step back when I saw the elongated canines protruding from their upper jaws. "My God," I whispered, "it's real. It's all real." Elena nodded grimly. "We have 12 patients in this condition now. The latest one was brought in just yesterday, a young shepherd who was found in the mountains, half dead from blood loss." As we approached one of the cells, its occupant, a middle-aged woman who might once have been beautiful, suddenly lunged at the glass. I flinched, but Elena didn't even blink. "The glass is reinforced," she explained, "and treated with a special coating. They can't see their reflections in it. Seems to disorient them." I peered closer, my scientific curiosity overriding my fear. The woman's movements were jerky, almost animalistic. Her eyes were fixed on me, filled with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. "Have you tried any treatments?" I asked, forcing myself to observe clinically. Elena sighed. "Everything we can think of, transfusions, antipsychotics, even experimental therapies. Nothing works. If anything, giving them blood seems to make their condition worse, more lucid, but also more dangerous." I pulled out my tablet, calling up the notes I'd made on the flight. "According to my great-great-grandfather's journal, traditional remedies include garlic, holy water, and sunlight. Have you tried any of those?" Elena's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." I shrugged. "At this point, I'm willing to consider any possibility. This is clearly beyond the realm of conventional medicine." She hesitated, then nodded. "We did try garlic, actually. It seems to cause them pain, but no lasting effects. As for sunlight, well, we had an accident during a transfer. One patient was exposed to direct sunlight. The results were dramatic." The way she said dramatic made me decide not to press for details. Instead, I turned my attention back to the patients. Despite their violent behavior, I could see the fear in their eyes, the confusion. These were people who needed help. "I'd like to examine one of them," I said. "Preferably the most recent case, if possible." Elena looked uncertain. "It's dangerous, Adrian. They're far stronger than they look, and their bite." She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to her neck. I met her gaze steadily. "I understand the risks, but if we're going to help these people, I need to get closer. I need to understand what we're dealing with." After a long moment, she nodded. "All right, but we'll take every precaution, and at the first sign of trouble, we abort. Agreed?" "Agreed." The next hour was a flurry of preparation. I was outfitted in a biohazard suit, complete with a reinforced collar to protect against bites. Elena briefed me on the patient, Mihai, the young shepherd, and the security protocols. By the time we were ready to enter the cell, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. As the cell door hissed open, I got my first close look at a vampire. Mihai was young, probably no more than 20, but his eyes held an ancient, predatory intelligence. He was restrained to the bed, but I could see the muscles straining against the bonds, far more powerful than his slight frame suggested. "Hello, Mihai," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm Dr. Helsing. I'm here to help you." At the sound of my voice, Mihai's head snapped towards me. He inhaled deeply, and a look of confusion passed over his face. You smell different," he said, his voice raspy from disuse, "like home." I froze. Could he somehow sense my connection to this place, to the history of vampire hunting in my blood? I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Mihai, can you tell me what happened to you? What do you remember?" As he spoke, I carefully approached, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. I needed to get a blood sample to compare it to the one I'd received in London. "I'm going to take a small sample of your blood, Mihai. It won't hurt, I promise." He nodded, seeming almost eager. But as I prepared the needle, something changed. Mihai's nostrils flared, and his eyes fixed on my wrist, where a small gap had appeared between my glove and sleeve. "Blood," he whispered. "I can smell it." "Your blood." What happened next was a blur. With strength that should have been impossible, Mihai snapped his restraints. I stumbled back, but he was faster, inhumanly fast. I felt a searing pain in my wrist as his teeth sank into my flesh. Alarms blared. I heard Elena shouting, the sound of running feet, but all I could focus on was Mihai's eyes, locked with mine as he drank my blood. In that moment, I saw something that chilled me to my core: recognition. Not of me, but of something in my blood. Something that made him recoil, breaking his grip on my wrist. As security personnel swarmed the room, subduing Mihai with practiced efficiency, I sank to the floor. Elena was at my side in an instant, her face pale with worry. "Adrian, are you all right? We need to get you to quarantine immediately." But I barely heard her. My mind was reeling from what I'd seen in Mihai's eyes. It wasn't just bloodlust or madness. It was fear. Fear of something in my blood. Something that had been passed down through generations of Helsings. As they rushed me to quarantine, I caught a glimpse of myself in a reflective surface. My eyes were wide, my face pale with shock. But it was the wound on my wrist that truly caught my attention. It wasn't bleeding. In fact, it seemed to be closing before my eyes, the skin knitting together at an impossible rate. I realized then that I had become part of the story. The very blood that had brought me here, that had defined my family for generations, was now changing me, and I had no idea what I was becoming. The quarantine room was sparse and clinical, a far cry from the comforts of my London flat. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened. Elena stood on the other side of a glass partition, her face a mask of concern and scientific curiosity. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice slightly distorted by the intercom. I flexed my wrist, marveling at the lack of pain. The bite marks were now nothing more than faint pink lines. Physically, better than I should. Mentally, I'm not sure. Elena nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Your vital signs are stable, but unusual. Your heart rate is significantly lower than normal, and your body temperature has dropped by 2 degrees. Classic symptoms of vampirism," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "But I don't feel the hunger Mihai described. If anything, I feel stronger, more alert." A thought struck me, and I stood up abruptly. "Elena, I need my great-great-grandfather's journal. It's in my bag." She hesitated. "Adrian, we need to keep you in isolation until we're sure you're not changing." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "But that journal might hold the key to what's happening to me. Please, Elena, it's important." After a long moment, she nodded. "All right, I'll have someone bring it. But Adrian, be careful. We don't know what's happening to you." As I waited for the journal, I paced the small room, my mind whirling with possibilities. The Helsing blood had always been special. That much was clear from our family history. But could it actually provide some kind of immunity to vampirism? Or was it simply delaying the inevitable? When the journal finally arrived, passed through a small airlock, I practically pounced on it. I flipped through the pages frantically, searching for any mention of Helsing blood or immunity. And there, in a section I had previously overlooked, I found it. My great-great-grandfather's handwriting, usually so neat and precise, was shaky here, as if he'd written in great excitement or fear. "I have made a discovery that both elates and terrifies me. In my confrontations with the vampire, I have been bitten numerous times, yet I do not succumb to the curse. My blood, it seems, carries some protection against the vampiric taint. But this protection comes at a cost. With each exposure, I feel myself changing. Growing stronger, yes, but also other. I fear what I may become if this continues. Am I saving my humanity or merely transforming it into something else?" I looked up from the journal, meeting Elena's concerned gaze through the glass. "I think I know what's happening to me," I said slowly, "but you're not going to believe it." As I explained my theory, that the Helsing bloodline had developed a unique response to vampire bites over generations of hunting them, I could see the skepticism in Alana's eyes warring with her need to believe, to find an explanation for the inexplicable. "So you're saying you're part vampire?" she asked, her voice laden with disbelief. I shook my head. "Not exactly. More like vampire adjacent." My body is changing, adapting to fight the vampiric infection. But I'm not turning into one of them. I'm becoming something else entirely. Elena ran a hand through her hair, clearly struggling to process this information. Even if that's true, Adrian, we can't just let you out. It's too risky. We don't know how this will progress, what you might become capable of. She was right, of course, but as I stood there, feeling the new strength coursing through my veins, I knew we didn't have time for caution. Something was stirring in Transylvania, something ancient and evil, and I might be the only one who could stop it. Elena, I said, my voice low and urgent, I need you to trust me. Whatever's happening to me, it's given us an advantage we didn't have before. I can get close to them, maybe even communicate with them. We might never have a better chance to understand what's happening and find a way to stop it. She stared at me for a long moment, conflict clear on her face. Then, with a resigned sigh, she reached for the quarantine release controls. I hope you know what you're doing, Adrian, she said as the door hissed open, because if you're wrong, we might have just doomed us all. As I stepped out of quarantine, I felt the weight of centuries of Helsing history on my shoulders. I was no longer just a doctor or a researcher. I was a hunter, a protector, perhaps even a weapon against the darkness that threatened to engulf us all. The nurse's face was pale with shock. They escaped. All of them. It's like they coordinated somehow, and they took Mihai with them. I felt a chill run down my spine. Mihai, who had tasted my blood, who had seen something in me that frightened him. If he shared that information with the others. We need to go after them, I said, already moving towards the exit. Elena caught my arm. Are you insane? We need to lock down the hospital, call for backup. We're not equipped to handle this. I turned to her, feeling a new certainty settling over me. You're right. You're not equipped for this. But I am. This is what I was born for, Elena. What my family has been preparing for generations. I have to go. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. Not alone. You're not. Give me 5 minutes to grab some supplies. As Elena rushed off, I made my way to where my belongings had been stored. The old wooden trunk seemed to hum with energy as I opened it, as if it too sensed that its moment had come. I pulled out the silver cross, feeling its weight in my hand. Then, with only a moment's hesitation, I took the wooden stake as well. By the time Elena returned, armed with a medical bag and what looked suspiciously like a gun, I was ready. We slipped out of the hospital through a side entrance, avoiding the chaos of the main doors. The night air hit me like a physical force as we stepped outside. My senses, already heightened by whatever changes were happening to me, went into overdrive. I could smell the fear rolling off the hospital in waves, hear the frantic heartbeats of people blocks away, and underneath it all, a scent I somehow knew belonged to the escaped vampires. This way, I said, setting off at a pace that surprised even me. Elena jogged to keep up. How can you be sure? I tapped my nose. I can smell them. It's hard to explain. We moved through the darkened streets of the town, following a trail that only I could sense. With each step, I felt more alive, more in tune with the night around me. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Our path led us to the outskirts of town, towards the looming darkness of the Carpathian Mountains. As we approached the tree line, Elena grabbed my arm. Adrian, wait, she hissed. Look. I followed her gaze and felt my breath catch in my throat. There, moving with unnatural speed and grace through the trees, were dark figures. The escaped vampires, making their way up the mountain. And at their head, a figure that seemed to glide rather than walk, radiating an aura of power and malevolence that made my newly enhanced senses real. Dracula, I whispered, the name falling from my lips like a curse. As if hearing his name, the figure at the head of the group paused. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought he had spotted us. But then he turned, continuing up the mountain with his followers. Elena's grip on my arm tightened. We should go back, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Call for help. We can't face them alone. But I knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that we couldn't wait. Whatever Dracula was planning, whatever had brought him back after all these years, it was happening now. And I, Adrian Helsing, might be the only one who could stop it. We have to follow them, I said, my voice low but firm. This might be our only chance. Elena looked at me, fear and determination warring in her eyes. Then, with a short nod, she released my arm. "Lead the way, Helsing." As we plunged into the dark forest, following the trail of the vampires, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into the jaws of destiny. The story that had defined my family for generations was reaching its climax, and I was at its heart. The return of Dracula was not just a threat to be faced. It was a legacy to be confronted, a destiny to be fulfilled. The forest seemed to close in around us as we made our way up the mountain. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, casting eerie shadows in the pale moonlight. The air grew colder with each step, and an unnatural mist began to swirl around our feet. I led the way, my newly enhanced senses guiding us along the vampire's trail. The scent of them hung in the air, a mixture of decay and something else, something ancient and powerful. Elena followed close behind, her breathing ragged but determined. "How much further?" she whispered, her voice barely audible even to my heightened hearing. I paused, closing my eyes to focus on my senses. "Not far now. They're gathering. There." I pointed towards a rocky outcropping ahead, where the trees thinned out. As we approached, I motioned for Elena to stay low. We crouched behind a fallen log, peering out at the scene before us. The escaped vampires had formed a loose circle in a small clearing. In the center stood the figure I had identified as Dracula. Even from this distance, his presence was overwhelming. He was tall, unnaturally so, with long white hair that seemed to move in a non-existent breeze. His face was pale and aristocratic, but his eyes glowed red in the darkness, filled with an inhuman intelligence and cruelty. "My children," Dracula's voice carried easily to our hiding spot, rich and hypnotic. "You have done well to answer my call. The time has come for us to reclaim our rightful place in this world." The other vampires shifted restlessly, their eyes fixed on their master with a mixture of fear and adoration. "But first," Dracula continued, his gaze sweeping the circle, "I understand we have a complication. One of you has tasted the blood of a Helsing." My breath caught in my throat as Mihai was pushed forward. He fell to his knees before Dracula, trembling visibly. "Tell me, child," Dracula said, his voice deceptively gentle. "What did you sense in this Helsing's blood?" Mihai's voice was barely a whisper, but in the unnatural stillness of the clearing, it carried clearly. "Power, my lord, ancient power, but also something that burned, something that fought against our kind." Dracula's eyes narrowed. A Helsing in Transylvania, after all these years. He threw back his head and laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. How fitting, the final act of our long drama begins. I felt Elena tense beside me, ready to run, but I knew we couldn't leave. Not yet. We needed to know what Dracula was planning. "My children," Dracula addressed the group again, "our enemy has unwittingly delivered themselves into our hands. With the blood of a Helsing, our resurrection will be complete. We will be invincible." A chorus of hisses and snarls erupted from the gathered vampires. Dracula raised a hand, silencing them instantly. "Spread out. Find this Helsing. Bring them to me. Alive. Their blood is mine to take." As the vampires began to disperse, I knew our time was up. I turned to Elena, my mind racing. "We need to get back to town. Warn people. Prepare defenses." She nodded, her face pale but determined. "What about you? They're hunting for you specifically." I managed a grim smile. "I'll be the bait. Lead them away from the town. Buy us some time." Elena's eyes widened. "That's suicide, Adrian." "Maybe," I admitted, "but it's our best chance. My blood is different now, remember? I might be able to hold them off." Before she could argue further, a twig snapped nearby. We both froze, hardly daring to breathe. A figure emerged from the shadows, one of the vampires, nose raised, sniffing the air. "Go," I whispered to Elena. "Now, I'll distract it." She hesitated for a moment, then squeezed my arm. "Be careful," she breathed before slipping away into the underbrush. I stood up slowly, deliberately snapping a branch under my foot. The vampire's head whipped around, red eyes locking onto me, its lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing gleaming fangs. "Looking for me?" I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. The vampire let out an inhuman shriek and lunged. I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as it passed mere inches from me. Rolling to my feet, I grabbed a fallen branch, wielding it like a club. "Come on then," I growled, feeling the Helsing blood surge in my veins. "Let's dance." The fight was a blur of motion. The vampire was incredibly fast, its attacks coming from all directions. But I was changing too. My reflexes were sharper, my strength growing with each passing moment. I managed to land several solid blows, driving the creature back. But I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. More vampires would be coming, drawn by the sounds of our fight. I needed to move, to lead them away from the town and Elena. Fainting to the left, I suddenly broke into a run, heading deeper into the forest. I could hear the vampire giving chase, its frustrated howls echoing through the trees. Good, let it call the others. The further I could lead them from innocent people, the better. I ran like I'd never run before, leaping over fallen logs and dodging between trees with inhuman agility. The forest was alive around me, every sound and smell sharp and clear. I could hear the vampires behind me, their pursuit relentless. Suddenly, the trees thinned out, and I found myself on the edge of a cliff. Below, a raging river cut through the mountain, its waters white with foam. I skidded to a stop, pebbles skittering over the edge into the abyss. Turning, I saw the vampires emerging from the tree line. There were 5 of them now, spread out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape back into the forest. At their center stood Dracula himself, his red eyes gleaming with triumph. "Young Helsing," he purred, his voice carrying easily over the roar of the river. "How good of you to join us. Your ancestors would be so disappointed to see you cornered like this." I straightened, forcing myself to meet that terrifying gaze. Would they? I'm not the one who's been hiding in the shadows for centuries. Dracula's lips curled in a cold smile. "Brave words, but bravery will not save you. Your blood, Helsing, it calls to me. With it, I will become invincible. The world will tremble before us." "You'll have to take it from me first," I snarled, dropping into a fighting stance. Dracula's laugh was like ice down my spine. "With pleasure." He moved faster than thought, crossing the distance between us in the blink of an eye. I barely had time to raise my arms in defense before his fist connected with my chest, sending me flying backwards. I hit the ground hard, rolling dangerously close to the cliff edge. Gasping for breath, I struggled to my feet. Dracula was already there, looming over me. "You are strong, young one," he said, almost approvingly. "Stronger than your ancestors, but you are untrained, unready. You cannot hope to defeat me." I spat blood, my ribs screaming in protest as I raised my fists. "Watch me try." What followed was the most brutal fight of my life. Dracula was impossibly strong, impossibly fast. Each blow felt like being hit by a truck. But something was happening to me too. With each strike I took, each drop of blood spilled, I felt the power in my veins growing stronger. We traded blows back and forth, moving at speeds that would have been impossible for normal humans. The other vampires watched, hissing and snarling, but not daring to interfere in their master's fight. I managed to land a solid punch to Dracula's jaw, sending him staggering back a step. For a moment, surprise flickered in those red eyes. Then his face twisted in rage. "Enough!" he roared. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my throat. He lifted me off my feet, holding me out over the cliff edge. "You have spirit, Helsing, but in the end, you are just a man, and men die." As his grip tightened, cutting off my air, I saw movement in the trees behind the vampires. A flash of blonde hair, the glint of metal in the moonlight. Elena. She had come back against all odds. Our eyes met for a brief moment. I saw the determination in her face, the readiness to act. And I knew what I had to do. With the last of my strength, I grabbed Dracula's wrist. "You're right," I gasped. "Men die, but legends live forever." And with that, I pulled us both over the edge of the cliff. As we fell, I heard Elena's scream, saw the look of shock on Dracula's face. Then we hit the raging waters below, and the world dissolved into chaos. The river was brutally cold, the current incredibly strong. I was tossed and turned, smashed against rocks, pulled under again and again. But through it all, I held on to Dracula, refusing to let go. I don't know how long we were in the water. It could have been minutes or hours. But eventually, the river spat us out onto a rocky bank. I lay there, gasping for air, every part of my body screaming in pain. Beside me, Dracula stirred. He looked, diminished somehow. The raging waters had washed away some of his otherworldly presence, leaving him looking almost human. "Why?" he croaked, his voice weak. "Why sacrifice yourself?" I turned my head to look at him, feeling a strange mix of pity and triumph. Because that's what Helsings do. We protect, we sacrifice, and we never, ever give up. As the first rays of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I saw fear in Dracula's eyes for the first time. He tried to move, to crawl away from the approaching sunlight, but he was too weak. I watched as the sun touched him, heard his scream of agony, and then, in a matter of moments, he was gone. Nothing left but ashes, quickly scattered by the wind. I lay back, staring up at the brightening sky. I had done it. Dracula was defeated. But at what cost? I could feel the changes in my body. The power of vampire blood mingled with my own. I was neither fully human nor vampire, but something in between. As consciousness began to fade, I heard distant shouts, the sound of people approaching. Elena's voice, calling my name. I smiled faintly. Whatever I had become, whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. The legend of the Helsings would live on. And as long as there was darkness in the world, we would be there to fight it. My eyes closed, and I surrendered to exhaustion, knowing that when I woke, a new chapter in an ancient story would begin. I awoke to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. My body felt heavy, as if I'd been asleep for a very long time. As I slowly opened my eyes, adjusting to the bright light, a familiar face came into focus. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Dr. Helsing," Elena said, a mixture of relief and concern in her eyes. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and raw. Elena quickly offered me some water, helping me sit up slightly to drink. How long?" I managed to croak out. 3 weeks, she replied, setting the glass aside. "We weren't sure you'd make it. Your body, it's been through quite an ordeal." Memories flooded back. The fight with Dracula, the plunge into the river, the sunrise that had turned him to ash. I looked down at my hands, half expecting to see some visible sign of the changes I'd undergone, but they looked normal, if a bit pale. "Dracula?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Elena shook her head. "No sign of him. Just ashes on the riverbank where we found you. It's over, Adrian. You did it." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "And the others? The turned vampires?" "Most of them didn't survive the sunrise," Elena explained. "A few managed to flee back into the mountains. We're still searching, but—" She trailed off, her expression grim. I nodded, understanding the implication. The threat wasn't entirely gone, but it had been significantly diminished. "And me? What's the diagnosis, doctor?" Elena's face grew serious. "That's complicated. Your physiology has changed, Adrian. Your heart rate is persistently low, your body temperature decreased. You heal at an accelerated rate. That's probably what saved your life. And your blood work." She shook her head in amazement. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen." I absorbed this information, trying to process what it meant for my future. "Am I dangerous?" Elena's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "No more than you ever were," she said with a small smile. "You haven't shown any of the aggressive tendencies or blood cravings we saw in the turned vampires. Whatever's happened to you, it seems you've retained your humanity." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a new sense of purpose. "We need to study this," I said, my mind already racing with possibilities. My condition could be the key to understanding vampirism, maybe even finding a cure. Elena nodded, a spark of scientific curiosity in her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already started compiling data, but Adrian," her expression grew serious again, "you need to understand. This isn't just a medical condition. What's happened to you, it's going to change your life." I met her gaze steadily. My life changed the moment I received that blood sample in London. There's no going back now. Over the next few days, as my strength returned, Elena and I began to piece together what had happened to me. My Helsing blood, combined with the vampire bite and whatever power Dracula had possessed, had created something entirely new. I was stronger, faster, with heightened senses and accelerated healing, but I was still human in all the ways that mattered. As news of Dracula's defeat spread, I found myself becoming something of a reluctant celebrity in the small Transylvanian town. People would stop me on the street, thanking me, asking for my blessing as if I were some kind of saint. It was unsettling, to say the least. But there were darker whispers, too. Some feared what I had become, viewing me as a potential threat. And there were those who sought to exploit my condition, seeing it as a potential source of power or profit. 1 week after I regained consciousness, I stood on the balcony of my hospital room, looking out over the Carpathian Mountains. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the growing darkness, I could see more clearly than ever before, my enhanced vision picking out details that would have been invisible to normal human eyes. Elena joined me, leaning on the railing beside me. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly. I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "It is, but I can't help feeling, apart from it all now, like I'm seeing the world through a veil." She turned to face me, her expression serious. "What will you do now, Adrian? You could stay here, continue our research, or go back to London." I finished for her. "Try to resume my old life." Elena nodded. "Is that what you want?" I considered the question carefully. The old Adrian Helsing, the one who had arrived in Transylvania just weeks ago, might have jumped at the chance to return to his comfortable life in London. But I wasn't that man anymore. "No," I said finally. "I can't go back. Not now. What I've become, what I've learned, it's bigger than me. Dracula may be gone, but there are others out there, other threats, and I might be the only one equipped to face them." Elena's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "You don't have to do it alone, you know." I looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes, the willingness to step into a world she barely understood. "Are you sure? This life, it's dangerous, unpredictable." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Sounds exciting to me. Besides, someone needs to keep you from doing anything too reckless, Dr. Helsing." I couldn't help but laugh, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Well then, Dr. Lupe, I guess we have work to do." As the last light faded from the sky, I felt a new sense of purpose settling over me. I was Adrian Helsing, neither fully human nor vampire, but something in between. A bridge between two worlds, uniquely positioned to protect one from the other. The Helsing legacy would continue in a way my ancestors could never have imagined. As I stood there, looking out over the darkening landscape with Elena by my side, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in an age-old story. The night was calling, and I was ready to answer.